The winter of 1937 settled over Ashvale like a heavy breath, cold and grey, pressing silence into every corner of the valley. The mines had gone quiet by then, the machines rusted, the town shrinking into its own shadow. On paper, Ashvale still existed, but somewhere between the courthouse and the archives, its name began to disappear. Maps were redrawn, ledgers rewritten, and within a few years it was as if the town had never been there at all. No one could say why. Maybe someone wanted it forgotten. Maybe the land itself was tired of being remembered. Ruth Carver wasn't supposed to find it. She was just a young journalist from Louisville, sorting through abandoned county records, when she came across a file so thin it looked like a mistake. Inside was a single birth certificate, dated that same winter. The mother's name was Sarah Whitlock. The father's line was blank, and the attending witness was her 15-year-old son, Thomas. The ink was still dark, steady, as though whoever wrote it believed what they were signing mattered. But something about it felt wrong. A boy couldn't be his own brother's witness. And why had every other record from that year been destroyed, except this one? Ruth began asking questions, but in the small towns along the ridge, questions only made doors close. She drove into the valley where Ashvale once stood. What she found wasn't a town, but the ghost of one. The church steeple leaned, hollow and broken. The schoolhouse was gone, the bell missing. Even the road seemed to avoid the place, curving slightly away, like it didn't want to lead her there. Only one building remained standing at the edge of the woods, a narrow farmhouse with shutters drawn, and a single lamp burning faintly behind the glass. Locals had warned her about the Whitlock property. They said the light in that house never went out, not for storms, not for years. They said the boy who lived there had seen things no child should see. Some believed he'd gone mad after his father's death in the mines. Others said madness was too easy a word. They whispered that he'd found a way to bring something back. When Ruth asked an old shopkeeper about the family, the woman's hands began to shake. She said the Whitlocks were cursed, but the mother prayed to a god no church would name, and that her son spoke like he'd lived before. He said he was born twice, the woman whispered, once by her and once by himself. Ruth didn't know what to make of that. But when she turned back toward the valley, she thought she saw a light move in the upper window of the farmhouse, slow, deliberate, as if it had been waiting for her. And in that moment, the air seemed to hum with a low sound, almost like a heartbeat buried in the cold. Something was still alive in Ashvale, something that refused to be forgotten. The road to the Whitlock farm was nothing more than a scar across the land, swallowed by weeds and silence. By the time Ruth reached it, the sun had already dipped behind the hills, leaving the world the color of rusted copper. The air felt thick there, as if it carried weight. The trees around the property were brittle and gray, their branches curling inward like old hands. Even the wind avoided the place, breaking off at its borders. Ahead stood the farmhouse, narrow and pale, leaning against the edge of the dying forest, like something waiting to fall. The soil around it was black. Not dark from rain or shadow, but black like ash. Locals had told Ruth that a storm once touched this land, and nowhere else. A single circle of lightning that burned the field, but never spread. Since then nothing had grown. She stepped into the yard and felt the ground give slightly under her boots, soft and damp, as though the earth itself was still bleeding from some long-forgotten wound. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of metal and mildew, but beneath it was something warmer, something that reminded her of breath. Dust floated like slow snowfall in the dim light. Every surface seemed to hum faintly, not with sound, but with a feeling, like the house had been holding its breath for too long. She found the kitchen first. A table sat in the center, its wood warped and swollen from time. On it lay a cracked bowl filled with water gone dark from age. A child's toy horse rested beside it, its wooden legs burned black. Ruth's notebook trembled slightly in her hand as she wrote her observations. The place feels alive. The words looked strange the moment she saw them on the page. Upstairs, the floorboards moaned beneath her weight. In the hallway, she saw a small mirror hanging crooked. The glass warped and rippled. For a moment, she thought she saw movement in it, a faint figure standing just behind her shoulder. But when she turned, there was only empty air. The sound of her own heartbeat filled the space, slow and heavy. The attic door creaked open after 3 tries. The smell hit her first: old paper, candle wax, something faintly sweet, like flowers long dead. Boxes were stacked against the walls, their labels faded. In the corner, a trunk sat open, and inside, wrapped in linen, were dozens of photographs. Families, gatherings, children at play. At first glance, they looked ordinary. But when Ruth held them closer to the light, her stomach turned. Every face was gone, scraped away clean, the paper cut in small circles where eyes and smiles once were. She found one that made her stop. A woman standing in a field, hand resting on a young boy's shoulder. The edges were burned, but beneath the scratches she could still see the faint outline of a knife. The mother's figure seemed to lean toward the boy, almost merging with him. The longer Ruth stared, the more it looked like their shadows were the same shape. A sudden gust pressed against the attic window. The air shifted, carrying a faint whisper, soft and rhythmic, like someone praying from far away. Ruth set the photograph down and stepped back. The floor beneath her creaked once, like a heartbeat. Then again, then silence. Outside, night had fallen completely. The lamp she'd left by the car flickered through the window, its glow pulsing in uneven intervals. It looked, for a moment, almost like someone was walking in front of it. She waited, holding her breath, the house listening with her, and then the light went out. Ruth began her search for Thomas Whitlock in the places he once belonged to: his school, the small-town clinic, the church that had long since locked its doors. Each person she met spoke of him carefully, like saying his name too loudly might invite something. His teachers remembered him as quiet, always polite, always watching. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his words stuck. One recalled the day before a mine collapse in 1935, when Thomas calmly told the class that the ground was hungry. The next morning, 4 men died, including his father, Samuel Whitlock. At first, the town pitied the boy. He was motherless in spirit, fatherless in truth, and far too old in the eyes. But the pity soured as his manner changed. He began to write in 2 hands, his usual, small and neat, and another, sprawling, crude, pressed too deep into the paper. He spoke in a strange way, often saying, "we" instead of "I," as if his words were shared between 2 minds. "We're not alone here," one teacher remembered him saying. "He still stands behind us." Ruth found the school nurse's notes tucked inside an old filing drawer. The paper brittle, the ink pale but legible. One entry caught her breath. "Thomas claims his father visits him at dusk," it read. "He describes a shadow on the wall that breathes." The nurse had tried to comfort him, but the boy's calmness unnerved her. When she asked if he understood death, Thomas smiled faintly and said, "He isn't gone, he just moved inward." The nurse wrote that the temperature in the room dropped suddenly after that. When the town doctor examined Thomas after an unexplained fainting spell, he discovered something that didn't fit in the realm of grief or imagination. The boy's blood type matched neither his mother's nor his father's. The doctor ordered another test. The same result. It wasn't a simple error. It was an impossibility. The doctor wrote only 2 words in his report before locking it away: split origin. Ruth read those notes under the dim light of her motel lamp. The handwriting shook, even in ink. She imagined the boy sitting there under cold light, small and still, answering questions as if he already knew the end. Every story she collected carried that same quiet horror, How Thomas seemed to anticipate things before they happened, how his eyes reflected light even in shadow, how he once told a classmate, "When you dream of me, it's really him watching." That night, Ruth couldn't sleep. The air in her room felt heavy, her reflection in the mirror slightly off, as if someone stood beside her just outside of view. Somewhere in the dark, a boy Sip's voice seemed to whisper from memory, not pleading, not frightened, just certain. "We sir's still here." The winter of 1937 came early, burying the valley in white before the harvest could finish. The Whitlock farm disappeared beneath it, the fields erased, the fences half swallowed by snow. No one saw Sarah Whitlock in town that season. Curtains stayed drawn, smoke stopped rising from the chimney, and yet at night, neighbors swore they saw a faint orange glow flickering through the attic window, like a candle that refused to die. It was around that time, the midwife said, that Sarah began to speak of time folding. She told those few who dared visit that her child would come early, but not in the way people thought. When the pain began, no doctor was called. Only the sound of prayer carried through the walls, a low hum that deepened until it felt less like a voice and more like the heartbeat of the house itself. Those who passed by that night said they saw the boy, Thomas, standing outside in the snow staring at the upper window. His breath rose slow, steady. He didn't move for hours. When one neighbor approached, Thomas turned and said, "He's already here." His voice was calm, almost kind. No one could explain what happened inside that house. Some claimed Sarah's child was stillborn, others swore they heard crying that went on until dawn. But one detail never changed. Thomas was there, holding his mother's hand. And when she whispered those final words, he nodded like he understood something too vast for anyone else to grasp. By morning, the farmhouse was silent. The midwife arrived late, her boots sinking into the thawing snow. Inside, the bed was stained, the sheets damp with the scent of iron and salt. Sarah lay pale but peaceful, her eyes half open, her lips curved into what looked like a faint smile. Thomas sat beside her, his hand still on hers. When the midwife asked to see the baby, he only said, "He's resting." Then he stood and left the room. The birth records filed days later made little sense. The attending witness was listed as T. Whitlock. The signature matched Thomas's handwriting. The doctor's name had been crossed out, replaced by a line. A death certificate followed soon after, infant male, stillborn, but the ink was darker, newer, as though someone had written it over the truth. 3 days later, when neighbors broke in after seeing no light, the house was nearly empty. The fireplace still smoldered, faint heat radiating from the ashes. Sarah was gone. No body, no trail in the snow. Only the cradle remained in the bedroom, carved by hand, the wood polished smooth. Inside lay a baby, breathing softly, eyes closed, skin pale as milk. Beneath the cradle, etched into the wood with a knife, was a single name, Thomas. The midwife backed away, crossing herself before she ran into the cold. Later she told Ruth she couldn't explain what she'd seen, that the air around the child shimmered faintly, as if the world itself bent to make space for him. "It was like watching something start and end at the same time," she whispered, "like time remembering itself." And that night, for the first time since Sarah vanished, the light in the attic window began to burn again. By the time Ruth returned to Ashvale, the town had nearly erased itself. The mine was gone, the church reduced to a skeleton of wood and dust. Only the wind still carried the stories, low and trembling. People spoke of a boy in the woods, a tall figure with pale skin, carrying an old brass lantern that glowed with a soft, living light. He called himself Tommy. He never gave a last name, but he didn't need to. Everyone already knew. The stories were always the same, even decades apart. He looked no older than 15. His clothes were old-fashioned, clean but threadbare, his voice calm, polite. When strangers met him on the old forest path, he would ask for directions to home, but when they turned to point the way, he would already be gone, leaving only the faint smell of smoke and something sweet, like candle wax. Ruth spent weeks searching records, piecing together fragments that time had tried to bury. Every 10 years, a census appeared with a name she recognized, Thomas Whitlock. The handwriting never changed. The age never changed. 15. The ink from 1947 was the same shade as in 1957, then 1967. Each document signed in the same deliberate hand, steady and practiced, as though written by someone who had long stopped aging. She drove to the farmhouse at dusk. The road had become little more than mud and bone. The house still stood, tilted and sunken, its paint the color of old ash. No footprints led to the door, yet the lantern in the attic window burned steady, its glow soft and golden, pulsing faintly, as if in rhythm with a heartbeat. Ruth didn't go inside. She stood in the field, notebook trembling in her hand, listening. The air was still, but it wasn't quiet. The house seemed to exhale, long and low, like someone breathing just beneath the floor. That night, she wrote her final entry in the motel by the highway. Her handwriting shook, but her words were clear. He wasn't born again, she wrote. He never stopped. She described the lantern, how its flame seemed to react when she spoke the name Thomas, flickering once, then burning brighter, almost in recognition. Outside, the night pressed close to her window. Somewhere beyond the tree line, faint and far, a light moved through the woods, steady, deliberate, searching. For a moment, she thought she saw a boy there, carrying that same lantern, his face calm, his eyes older than the land itself. And just before the light disappeared, she swore she heard two voices, not one, whispering from the dark, "We're home." The road to the Whitlock farm was almost gone now, swallowed by weeds and silence. Ruth walked the last mile on foot, the air heavy with the scent of rain and something older, something that clung to memory more than to earth. The farmhouse stood where it always had, though time had stripped it of everything but its outline. The roof sagged, the windows gaped like open wounds, and yet the shape of it remained, stubborn, waiting. She carried her camera in one hand and her recorder in the other, though she wasn't sure why anymore. This wasn't for proof. It was for understanding, or maybe confession. Inside, dust hung in long ribbons of light. The floor creaked in soft, rhythmic pulses beneath her steps, as though responding to her weight. She moved room by room until she reached the cellar door. It was half open, the hinges warped but still holding. A faint warmth rose from below. Against the cold of the evening, it smelled of earth, candle wax, and something faintly sweet, the scent of whiskey from 100 years gone. The cellar was small, the ceiling low. Her flashlight caught the shape of a cradle in the corner, coated in grey but unbroken by time. The wood glowed faintly under the beam, as if it still remembered being touched. Beneath it, the ground was darker, damp, breathing. Ruth crouched and pressed her palm to the soil. It was warm, not from sun or heat, but from something living just beneath the surface. She lifted her camera and began to film, whispering her notes as she had done since the beginning. This is the original foundation. The cradle is still intact. No sign of rot. Her voice trembled slightly. The earth here feels alive. The words barely left her lips before she saw them. Two sets of footprints in the dust. One small, the other larger. They didn't lead anywhere. They curved in slow spirals toward the cradle, circling tighter until they met at the center. At that point, they merged. The size, the shape, the weight indistinguishable. Child and man, one. She froze. The recorder slipped from her fingers, landing softly on the ground. It kept running. Her breath echoed through its static. Genetic tests confirm the Whitlock line shows no separation, she whispered. The same sequence repeating across generations. No mutation, no variation. Just the same. Her voice faltered, a loop without a beginning. The air shifted. The warmth grew stronger, rising from the soil like breath. The cradle creaked once softly, though nothing moved. Then came the faintest sound, a hum, low and tender, like a mother's lullaby hummed through the walls of the world. Ruth's flashlight flickered. The shadows deepened. She spoke one last time, barely above a whisper. He was already his own father before he was born. The recorder crackled. Then faintly, from somewhere close, too close, a boy Sip's voice answered, quiet and calm, with the weight of something eternal behind it. And now you are too. The tape ended there. No final breath, no scream, only the sound of earth shifting, slow and steady, as if the ground itself had begun to remember.